My name is Bill Quackenbush. I work for the Ho-Chunk Nation. I serve as their Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. I've been serving the nation since 2005 as a TIPO for the Ho-Chunk people. We initially, when we submitted for our TIPO program to be accepted by James Byrd, I don't know if that rings a bell with many of you out there. It has to, because there's a lot of old faces I'm noticing in the crowd here. Yeah, so not all of us dinosaurs have died off yet. Right? We say over here too. But that said, there's a lot of new faces that I see as well. And one of the things I often enjoy when we go to conferences, preservation conferences in particular, is those site visits, because this is where you really actually see, the works of our labor out here, not just as TIPO or preservation officers, but also as who we work with collaboratively, not only within our tribe, but with those outside entities, those municipalities, those interest groups, the state and federal agencies, in order to turn out a better product to who else but our constituents, our tribal members, right? That's who we are serving, our tribal governments, who in fact are serving, our tribal governments are serving our people. And so that said, when Valerie reached out, and I reached out to her in likeness, talking about, we were at Cherokee, and at that place there, I even realized that it says, it'd be really nice before I retire, is to host one of NATHPO's conference here in God's country. I say it with tongue in cheek here. I always call Wisconsin Green Bay Packer land. Sorry about you folks there over there, God's country. But I'll get off that joke a little bit too. But that said, in discussion, we had talked about, how the conference, would take place if it, in fact, they had selected, the Ho-Chunk Nation as the recipient of hosting this year's conference in 2024. What was interesting, though, at the time, I really didn't fully comprehend what it would entail. I thought, well, I can take them out to our site. I can sit there in tongue in cheek, through a full conference for once, right? Everybody gets to a week-long conference. That's a long conference, isn't it? Out there. So you always have to do everything that's piling up on your desk, even throughout that conference. And I know at this conference over here, those are one of the things that we had talked about. How do we adjust that a little bit? How do we give people time to work on their project while they're still at a conference trying to work on what we do for a living? So that said, I didn't walk you all the way out here to talk about the process. That was a little walk more than I thought would be taken this morning over here. But the reason why I wanted to bring you this is, first of all, it afforded you some shade. Otherwise, on a big, vast prairie area that is being actively restored. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of why it was so important for the Ho-Chunk people. Oh, microphone.
Yeah, you can use that.
And I don't know if this works very well, if it helps anything, because I tend to speak a little more louder than most.
We'll get you on the recording anyway, so that'd be great.
But that said, we were running into issues on the far end of what properties did we really want to focus on in order to include in this site visit. And I didn't give it much thought other than the fact that we are what they refer to as, obviously, as an at-large type tribe. An at-large tribe is one that really doesn't have a formal reservation to focus all of our efforts as a tribal government and a tribal department and a tribal preservation officer, focus all our efforts internally in order to make, our reservation, per se, a better place for our tribal members. We're being an at-large tribe, we're spread across no less than 3 different states. We have tribal members, and associated with that, our tribal departments have to deal with a big logistical nightmare, and that we cover Illinois, Minnesota, parts of Iowa, right, and in Wisconsin. Not to mention those removal periods where they pushed us to no less than 4 other different states. So I, as a preservation officer, have a big footprint to cover, Section 106, I want to see where they removed us to 2 different places in Minnesota, one place in, Iowa, all the way out to Nebraska, right? Winnebago tribe, in fact, are our close relatives. They still remain out there to this day, right? So I worry about Section 106 and all these removal footprints, plus the routes they took us. NAGPRA, same thing. But when it comes to ancestral territories, that's where I really focus a lot of our efforts and time and money on here, because we try to create preservation opportunities for our tribal members who have lost a lot of their culture and their ways of life over there through the assimilation process and through the removals, to bring them back to properties that they can call their own, that they come here and, for a lack of a better term, take a breath of fresh air from reality out there. And so this Badger Ammo became a focus of us as being part of that presentation to you folks on there, because I know each and every one of the TIPOs in here are thinking, well, they're concentrating on their property. What properties do they have out there that they could do the exact same thing for Valerie next year, right, over there, in order to bring them to show off and showcase some of their works of labor out there. And so Badger Ammo serves a good purpose for that. And one of the first things I think we should do, though, is talk a little bit about the history of the Badger Ammo. So we call it the former Badger Ammo plant here now, because it used to be a big, giant, military base, Army military process where they made ammo out here, too. And they have now transferred over to different agencies and local municipalities and state agencies now through the last 20-some years. That said, the nation was one of the last hogs on the teat. They always are. Tribes are, for some reason, not considered the same as a federal agency over here when they get access land over here, and really fought long and hard to gain the few actual acreages that we did over here, too. So what I want to do, first of all, is I want to introduce Kurt Mine. Kurt Mine back here is replacing one of our tribal legislators for District 2 over here. And this name was Kristen White Eagle. And she was going to stand up here and talk a little about the history and how we first acquired the land that we ended up over here of Badger Ammo here, and what it took for our nation, the millions of dollars it cost, and the hundreds of staff that worked on gaining access land out of here when it should have been something that was rightfully ours at the beginning, right? So I'll introduce Kurt Mine back here. Kurt's been a lifelong member of Sauk County's residency over here. I think Kurt's from Sauk County, huh? Oh.
Elsewhere, but I really grew up here.
Okay, so I'll introduce Kurt. Let's give Kurt a first big hand right here first for just showing up today in front of all these mean tippos out there and such. That's really hard to do. So here we go. Okay, I'll turn it over to Kurt. Kurt?
There are bikes coming too, by the way, people. Yeah, just so you know.
And there's a lot more room down here if you want to get closer.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. Well, right away, but it's a beautiful way to be interrupted because this trail didn't exist until 4 or 5 years ago, and it is a result of the collaborative work that's gone on for so long, and it's introducing so many people to this land, in this particular spot, introducing many people to the role of the Ho-Chunk Nation on this land. So my name's Kurt Miney. I have lived in this area most of my adult life, and so I have been involved in this project most of that time. And I'll start with a quick story. When I was living in town, I was working up just a few miles north and near where you'll be meeting at a group called the International Crane Foundation, a group that works on conserving cranes all over the world. And it was at that point in 1997 that the Army announced that this immense military facility would no longer be needed for U.S. defense purposes. And that opened up the gates to quite a process that I only have a few minutes and can only begin to share with you the amazing story that's unfolded here. But let me, before I do that, just say thank you to Bill for inviting me to be here with you all, and to all my other friends in the nation. Melanie's here, and Kristen, who couldn't be here. And the bottom line here is, if I say nothing else, has been personally for me, this process has been one of constant education, lifelong education on the history, language, culture, and presence of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And I'm so immensely grateful to the nation for that. And it continues. It's every day there's something new to learn and appreciate. So the history, I won't go into the native history because in this group, I'm not qualified, and I know that. So I'll leave it to Bill and Melanie and others to talk about the history of the Ho-Chunk and the other nations in this area. We are in Sauk County, along the Sauk Trail. So yes, the role of the Sauk and Fox is critically important in the history here as well. But to jump ahead to the Army history, in 1942, right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 80 farm families scattered across what was the historic Sauk Prairie received letters in the mail saying that the U.S. Army was going to be taking over their farms, period. And so 80 farm families, as well as several schools, churches, and other properties were taken over in just 3 months in early 1942 to serve the war purposes. And within 9 months, the Badger Army ammunition plant was up and running, and it became ultimately, we think, the largest producer of the military propellant used in arms anywhere in the world. And this, I should have brought this out from our displays, but this shows you the infrastructure. There were 1,400 buildings on this land. There were 10,000 workers working around the clock in World War II. And I hasten to add that there were at least several dozen members of the Ho-Chunk Nation working here as well as others from other tribes in Wisconsin. The Army operated this plant here for the next 60 years. It was opened during World War II, during the Korean conflict, during the Vietnam War. And then those of us who have grayer hair will remember that in the early 90s we had the first Gulf War, and it did not open for production, which was sort of the writing on the wall that it was no longer needed. In 1997, the U.S. government announces that it will no longer be needed, and that sets off the process. That's when I entered into the story in an active way, working with all the other environmental groups mainly in the area, as well as other community organizations, to begin to have a conversation about what might happen. And I want to mention that when I volunteered to do this, when I volunteered to be kind of the coordinator for this ad hoc group, I made 2 calls the first morning. The first one I don't remember. It probably was to the congressman's office because he had failed in his efforts to try to resolve what would happen here. But the second one was to the Ho-Chunk Nation, and it was pretty much a cold call. I had friends and had worked with the Nation on other projects, but I didn't know who to call. I don't even know, Bill, if we had a tribal historic preservation officer at that point. I can't remember. This would have been 1997, but I talked to the tribal attorney at the time, and that began a conversation 27 years ago that has never stopped. It continues. Our conversations and others, key people in our community, laid the foundation for a community-based effort to try to come to a shared idea about what should happen here. It took a long time, hundreds and hundreds of meetings over a period of about 3 or 4 years. We had this process that there was no precedent for. We had to make it up as we go along. A lot of other Army facilities were closing at the time, but there was not one that was quite like this. So after 3 years, we had a formal process that began. We got a little bit of federal money coming thanks to our now senator, Tammy Baldwin, who I am happy to say she's a great senator and has been a real key ally to the nation, and talked to John Greendeer about that. But the process ended up with this report called the Badger Reuse Plan, with the Ho-Chunk Nation taking the lead in helping craft it in important ways. I won't go into detail. Maybe if there's a little more time for Q&A, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll boil it down. One of the things I learned as a non-tribal member and then trying to be a good ally to the nation, first, just listen. Just listen, and listen as long as you can for every chance you get, and that continues to this day. And as I say, it's been such an education for me, learning about the nation who I only knew as the Ho-Chunk Nation, none of the background. The key to this whole thing was coming together as a whole community in a very divisive time when there was a lot of conflict and pain and loss. This land is layered in loss, removal, pain, trauma. And we wanted to see if we could turn a new page to create a different future that would break from that history of loss and pain. And the key to that was seeing if we could come up with a shared vision for this land. And the key line for me on this was, you will never have a shared vision unless you can define your shared values. And it took us a long time to do that. But ultimately, we had basically a unanimous consensus around the values that would guide whoever would take back the land. That has guided us ever since. The Badger Reuse Plan has helped guide the Ho-Chunk Nation in its land use. Randy will talk about that in a minute. But the last thing I want to say is the significance, and you'll hear from Melanie about what's behind me here. I'm in the environmental conservation work. I do a lot of work on ecological environmental restoration. But we have all learned you can't restore land without restoring culture and people and community, and vice versa. And Melanie's work here is so symbolic of that, and it's been transformative, not only for me, but for hundreds of people. You know, this is the largest group I think we've ever had here, but we get groups all the time and are able to share and open up the conversation about the nation's presence always here through this work. So I'm eternally grateful to the ongoing process of restoration of the people and the land together. So I'll stop there because I know time's tight, but I want to also mention that there are some maps here that I brought along, and some of you already have them, but please pick one up.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. I appreciate that. I'm going to raise the microphone up here a little bit, not volume-wise because I don't know how to do that. I'm going to introduce the next individual here. I've worked with Randy since he came onto the nation back in the early 2000s, if not sooner. And he works in our environmental department. I'll let him introduce himself a little more fuller over here. You can see why I raised the microphone up, right? And that said, since the land transfer there, Randy has been overseeing the process of what the acronym of BOT stands for. I think it's Badger Ordnance Team. Oversight team, close enough on here. So I'll let Randy talk a little bit about the history of what was gifted to us over here and the transformation that has now taken it.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, my name is Randy. Is this on?
Oh yeah. It's kind of quiet, so just
Okay.
make the best of it.
Yeah, Randy Poma. My title is Environmental Sciences Program Manager, and I work in the Tribe's Division of Environmental Health. And I've been working on this project since probably back to about 2002. And initially, that was when the tribe was trying to figure out exactly what piece of the former Badger ammo plant they wanted. So I was really the technical advisor, doing a lot of GIS work and really identifying areas that may have environmental contamination and things like that, and trying to steer the tribe to have all the information they need so that they can make an informed decision on what land they want out here. So the piece of land that the tribe received behind us is about 1,550 acres in total, and it's basically the big flat area you see, and that's the outwash plain. We're actually standing at the base of a terminal moraine from the glacier that came up right behind you, sat there, went through freeze-thaw cycles for a couple thousand years, and all that, when that glacier eventually melted over the years, all that meltwater fanned out on this outwash plain, and that over time developed into a tall grass prairie. So we've been implementing activities to basically restore about 1,200 acres of prairie out here. And the process to get that area restored is it's a lengthy one. So we've been doing a lot of work with invasive species, and then just prepping areas for conversion to native grasses and wildflowers. So if you look behind you on this trail, this is a really good example of how a lot of the tribal land looked when it was received in December of 2014. Big thickets of woody invasives, a lot of autumn olive, Eurasian honeysuckle, multiflora rose, Japanese barberry, plants like that, and all kinds of herbaceous invasive species as well. So we've been doing a lot of work to get rid of and control those invasive species. So that can include the use of prescribed fire, machinery, mechanical removal, and then we also do use chemicals out here. So basically we put fire back on this landscape in the spring of 2015, and that's probably the first time this area had fire in probably 150 years or maybe more than that. So very historic moment, putting fire back on the landscape as a management tool. And this is something the Ho-Chunk people and other tribes in this area were doing for thousands of years. So we're just, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're putting practices back on the land that have always been here. But fire alone is not enough to control the invasive plants. So that's when we come in with forestry mowers and things like that to knock that stuff down, get it to a manageable size where we can run fire through it and top kill it off, or use chemicals to permanently kill those plants off. Bike's coming, just so you know. Once we get those invasives under control, then we're really looking to convert areas back to native grasses and wildflowers. And behind me, what you'll see is some good examples of that. So the big blue stem, the brown in the back, that's a planting from the fall of 2018. That's 130 acres or so. And then kind of in the foreground here, this real lush lime green color, that's a planting from 2021. That's about 30 acres. In 2023, we planted about 115 acres, just a little bit to the west here. And our next major planting is going to be in 2020, in the spring of 2026. So we've, I would say we're over a third of the way done with our restoration work, and it's been going very well. Everything we do out here, we're self-supporting, so all of our work is either funded through grants or it's through contracts with federal agencies such as USDA and RCS, where we use the EQIP program for management and restoration. So besides all the restoration work, we have a ton of research going on out here. So this area is really known as the last holdout for grassland birds in the Midwest, one of them. It's a very large contiguous landscape of grasslands. So we have about 20 rare grassland birds out here, and those are either state or federally listed as special concern, threatened, or endangered. So all of our management work and restoration work is always keeping those birds and other species in mind. We don't want to negatively affect them, but and to make those decisions, we need to have the research that's being conducted by a lot of volunteers. So people are out doing grassland bird surveys. We have small mammal surveys, bat surveys, a lot of insect surveys for bumblebees and other insects, and reptile surveys and things like that. So I think I'll just leave it at that for now. If we have time after this, I'd be happy to answer questions. But I guess I'd like to bring Melanie up to the mic. Yeah.
Melanie.
Thank you.
This is what I'm paid for.
Big bucks too, I hope.
Yeah, right. There you go. That should be terrific.
Haini pi I chakaro. Ho chunk rajra chakshapyungenga. Egi maichere rajra. Melanie Talmadge Signs. I greeted you as friends this morning in the language that's been spoken on this land longer than any other language. The Ho-Chunk. I was raised a Ho-Chunk tribal member. I've never been a tribal employee, however. I've worked in the nonprofit sector my entire career. Most people can find me on Google under my name, Melanie Talmadge Signs. And I'm also the founding director of Little Eagle Arts Foundation. My mother was one of the original tribal members that helped the tribe to get federal recognition in 1963. Our first elected president, Dr. Helen Minor Miller, was my mother's sister and my godmother. And so I've had a deep connection to our tribe throughout my 63 years of walking this planet. And it gives me, okay. And it gives me, such pleasure to have my relative and my loved one, Bill Quackenbush, ask me to come and speak on behalf of the citizens of the tribe at a place that is just so special to me, because this is a sculpture that I designed and we put up during COVID. If anything COVID taught us is art is medicine. How many of us engaged in some creative endeavor when we were in lockdown with our loved ones, or at the end of lockdown, our questionable loved ones? Whether you were putting together a puzzle or trying some new watercolor technique that you saw on YouTube or something like that, we recognize that the cognitive changes that go on in the brain, the physical endorphins that are released when you make art, it's healing. And this this mural here is a reflection of that. When we first got the grant from Sauk County for Earth, Sky, Water, that's the name of this piece, our intention was to have 30 of our youth workers or our youth that attend classes and workshops and stuff over at our House of Wellness near Baraboo. The intention was to bring all those kids out. We talk about, Ho-Chunk tribe, our clan, our the colors affiliated with our clan, the different animals and plant relatives that live on the prairie here, and then have the kids just interpret that information and go for it. But then COVID hit us, and we were locked down, and the tribe completely closed down. Many tribal members were, either put on layoff or permanently let go because of the funding changes with the tribe. But we still had this money, and it was keeping this nonprofit that I started 11 years ago, it was keeping us going. And if we had to return the money, like we did with 3 other grants, because they were all educational workshop grants, if we had to return that money, that would close us down. So I reached out to my kunika, my grandmother, and how many of us have reached out to our grandmas or our moms for advice when things like this come up? And my kunika, Neela Stacy, said, that means second born girl in Ho-Chunk. There's this thing I've heard called bubbles. It's like your family members that feel safe together during COVID. Why not reach out to several Ho-Chunk bubbles in Sauk County and see if they'd be interested in participating? And so I did. I reached out to 5 family groups. 4 said yes. And so throughout the summer, 3 years ago, we hosted workshops, outside workshops. We were all visored up and masked up, and it felt like I was a surgeon during those workshops. But we were down at our studio that we call Mawakanchuk Studio. It's the white building that you passed as you were driving up here. This land that my relative John Greendeer helped to facilitate, and many others, the name came from John taking this concept to our traditional court members who are representatives of the clans, and they told us from now on we'll call this land Ma Wakanchuk. Can you guys say that? Ma Wakanchuk. Ma. Wakanchuk is a word in Ho-Chunk. My mother would often squint her eyes and say, there's just not just a specific or direct translation in English for this Ho-Chunk word. What it means is holy, sacred, respected. This is Mawakanchuk. And so to have our tribal members during a global pandemic in which many of them were elders, and our tribal elders were the ones that were passing away at the highest percentage during COVID, to have them feel safe enough to come out and protect them under the umbrella of art and creativity and have them interpret these things on the tiles. It was just such a blessing, and we pulled it off. And so I encourage all of you, and when you go back to your home communities, LEAF, Little Eagle Arts Foundation, is a standalone Native-run nonprofit organization here in the state of Wisconsin. 2 days ago, I got recognized by the Museum of Wisconsin Art as the state's Community Educator of the Year. What we're doing, thank you. What we're doing out here with LEAF is a reflection of public-private collaboration. We lease the land. We pay the tribe to lease the land, but we do some really good work. In return, the tribe allows us to invite the public out here. They've invited us to, have our public art out here. Randy was the one who introduced me to these awesome stem walls, but you could barely see them. They were covered with, brambles and stuff when we first came out here. But since we've installed, Creator has blessed us with a thunderbolt on the top, and in the Ho-Chunk way, thunder, that's our Sky Clan. That's blessings right there. So I'm just kind of in a nutshell. You'll see the negative part where there's no tiles. That is directly a reflection of the panorama that you see on the bluffs. On the other side of the bluffs is this huge body of water that in Ho-Chunk we call De Wakanchuk. Can you say that? De Wakanchuk. De means lake or pond. Wakanchuk, you kind of know what that means. When the Europeans came and took on that land as vacation land, they renamed it as Devil's Lake, the total opposite of what we Ho-Chunks call it. We still call it De Wakanchuk, though. You know, who cares what they call it? But to have that body of water on the other side of the bluffs, and this over here, this is a land of reconciliation. First, the Ho-Chunks, Sauk, Meskwaki, Oto, Missouri, forcibly removed from this land. Then the Europeans that lived here, forcibly removed from this land. But now we can come back because land back, it's ours. Yeah. So I just want to thank you guys. Come and take a look at the mural when you can. Thank you.
All right, that's perfect. Excellent. Thank you, everybody that presented up here today. Thank you guys for being so patient, walking out here in this heat. I know I did notice that since we have quite a few groups out here, there's less mosquitoes on me standing over there, which is a really good thing, right? That said, my sister Melanie talked upon something very interesting, is that when she mentioned Ma Wakanchunk, the importance of this land here being sacred to us, right? And we often hear that in Indian country out there, right? Sacred this, sacred that, you know, and it becomes, you know, something of a norm for us to hear. But at times, the outside, you know, world out there, they don't look at it as that, or they don't view it that. And I remember sitting in one of those consultation meetings in a building over here with GSA, looking down their noses at us, as a tribe over there. And we had, you know, legal beagles sitting next to us, the likes of Randy Polma, tribal legislators, right? Our governing bodies sitting there, and they acted as if that we were just wasting their time, right? And then they kept on saying, well, you know, it's not enough. It's not enough. I need to know why it's so important to you. It's not enough. It's not enough. And in fact, they even asked us to do a study of your own, yet another study out there of why it's important for them to give us the time of day in order for us to acquire the mere land that we got back out of this 10,500 acres over here. And what it boiled down to is we took it back to the same body that Melanie had mentioned there, our traditional courts. Our tribe has this luxury of an aspect of our tribal government, is that we have our Supreme Court, our regular courts, right? But then we have a traditional court comprised of 12 clans or representatives of our clans in there that meet every Monday. Even through COVID, they kept on meeting over there against all odds out there to give us instructions internally. If we ever have a questions with our tribe culturally, or for our tribe, we go to our traditional courts every Monday and ask them, you know, so-and-so, why is former Badger being so contaminated that they said that the BIA wouldn't even accept it into trust because it was so encumbered? Why is it so important for to keep fighting for decades of time to get it back? And they kept on saying, we don't want portions of it. We want the entire Badger ammo. And so we did a study with them. We took our elders out here, sat out here, interviewed them at great length, got audio recordings, put it down in writing over here. And they came back resoundingly say that we want Badger ammo because it's sacred to us. It's central to our ancestral areas over here, and it holds something near and dear to our hearts that we don't ever want to give away, that we're still here, and we want that land back. And it was expensive at that. And I remember Preston Thompson standing over here. He says, you know what? I know how that Section 106 process works. I know what they stripped of us. I've dealt with that in politics through the years, in government. He goes, that Section 106, they talk about an ape. And I remember sitting with the GSA over here, or just GSA. And all they said was, oh, yeah, we can only talk about the ape, the inside of this fence, of this boundaries right on here. That's all that they concerned about. And that Preston Thompson, an elder of ours, he said, that ape that they talk about on here, that falls well within our ape of our ancestral, you know, territories. And our ape of this area, the sacred spot, it falls well within that. And they're talking to us as if we're like that. We're like the last people they need to talk to today, right? And so we fought hard to get that back. And truth be told, 1,500 acres, a portion of this 10,000 acre Badger ammo, which actually falls into our footprint of our traditional cultural landscape on here, was more important to us. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit just over that ridge over there at Devil's Lake State Park. And that's very contiguous to this property right on here. It's just Today's, right? Western society, they got a fence over here and a boundary line that they separate things. And we can't do that in our traditional ways of life. We have to look at the whole encompassing why it's so important to include Dewakanchunk, Mawakanchunk, and this whole vast areas that we call ancestral homes. She mentioned, right, the Alto, the Missouri, the Iowa. These people that have been our relatives for thousands of years, recently leaving across the Mississippi. Historically, the Winnebago tribe in Nebraska being stripped from us and having to reside up in Nebraska to this day. Still our brothers and sisters out here. Still just as important for them to protect the sites as we do out here, because this is what they come back to. This is what we have to do now, separated from other tribes out there, to protect and preserve our cultural resources, so that they have a place to come back. And they do come back. Every year, the Oto come back up here, and it seems like they bring me another horse, which I don't need. Kidding. I know Elsie Whitehorn, she brings us a horse on occasion over here. She did, at least, to one of our powwows. Long story short, we're not horse people, so we don't know what to do with it. But I think we do know what to do with it, but we're not going to do that. But that said, it's very important to recognize this is very important to our tribal members and our tribal communities. And not only that, it's more important to those neighbors and friends we collaboratively work together out there with, in partnership now with. We had Kurt Mine standing up here, talking about him. I don't know if he's a lifelong resident, but has been here an awful long time in here, and it was important for him, right? Even back in the 90s and early 2000s, to reach out to the nation because there was nobody else to reach out to. Because you know what? When we went across that gate and began talking about Section 106, that the federal government missed that opportunity, we went from access to surplus. They didn't even give us a blink. And then our nation came there and told them, it says, you're not in compliance with Section 106. And they told us, tongue-in-cheek, on record, said, well, if you hadn't said nothing and you hadn't caught us doing that, we would have been just fine. They said that right on record. And that's pretty dirty, right, out there? So we prevailed through that process. We ended up where we have today. And Randy mentioned about, very briefly, of the reason why we're using restoration to a high degree to clean up this ground. And it's reaching our goals, leaps and bounds out there, too. And it may not be able to be used, secularly for years or decades or generations to come. But we're in the right process. We're stepping it forward, right? We're doing something that we can pass on to our next generations of people out there, too. And our tribal governments come and go, believe it or not, right? She mentioned the infancy of our tribal government started in 1963. Not so long ago, because I know some people in here are older than that, including myself, right? Over there. And that's our tribal government. That's a conduit so that we have a voice in Washington and Western society. And we often say, for our next generations of people. And who knows what's going to happen in decades. We were one administration in Washington away for getting a big old marker swipe across, and we would have taken away all our sovereign rights, right? That's how close we are. So we have to make sure we keep giving stuff back to our tribes back here that extends past what our tribal government really has out there, too. It's great to say we're sovereign and we're a nation, this and that, but we have to keep doing these to our people over there, too. So I'm going to leave it at that. I didn't mention about why it's so important, this prairie on here, because those stories Preston talked about, our buffalo clan sitting in the fasting sites on those very ridges up there, and all those springs coming out of that water on there, and the ceremonial dance circles up there, and the burial systems that adapted into this area to include the earthworks, right? Those effigy mounds that you hear, they were across this landscape on here. And what was important for those Buffalo clan, those young men fasting up there to see their rights and their visions and their direction, they would hear those bison ran across this prairie at certain times, and if not pushed across here, it had a certain sound to them that was taken away from our men fasting up there. And it was replaced with this ugly soundscape and viewscape that you see today. And so slowly, if we start that ball rolling in the right direction, the next generation of time has the ability to take that next step. Get rid of that highway. Get rid of that railroad out there. Get rid of the light, the light noise out there. And slowly we regain these fasting sites and these sacred sites that made it what it is to us to this day. It's still here. They're not going to take the sacred component out of it, that holy component out of it. But now we have a chance to bring it back. And that's what we're doing as a tribal government. But we have to get on those buses and some air-conditioned vehicles. And so I'll see you at the next site over there. Thank you, folks. Thank you,